So, the new Class of '09 game is finally out, and it kinda sucks. Well, for the most part it does, but I'll explain in a moment. First off, Class of '09, for those who don't know, was a series of visual novels about two girls navigating the pitfalls of high school and beyond in the late aughts, but given an overdramatic, satirical look at the world and the people within it, taking everyday events and turning the exaggeration degree up to 11. It was made of two very good games and one game that was, at its best, just okay, and altogether was a series that people rather enjoyed, mostly for the characters, and even more specifically, the female cast. And then, for some reason, the creator of said series decided to make the next game in the series a puzzle game, of all things. Now, right away, this set off some alarm bells for people, but I decided not to jump the gun and to wait and see how things played out. I wouldn't get my hopes too high, but I wouldn't immediately judge it either, because surely it couldn't be as bad as Flipside was, right? Uh, well, kinda. I set my expectations low, and even still, they were kinda crushed. The story of this game, while interesting in concept, is so poorly executed that it feels almost meaningless at times. And that's even before you talk about the gameplay, because the puzzle aspect of this game, while fun initially, quickly becomes tedious and difficult to the point of needing to become nearly an expert at the game in only a couple hours in order to actually beat the main story. Now, let's take apart this game piece by piece so I can make you understand why I feel so mixed on it. Because what could have been done is so cool and interesting, yet got so mangled by the gameplay that sometimes it almost feels like an accident. Yes, despite what some people may think, and even what I thought after first playing it, there is a sort of story to this game. It's just that, like I mentioned, it's kind of poorly executed, and so it feels hard to even notice unless you really think about it. The main story is primarily split between 5 different campaigns, with each campaign being harder than the last. There's also the Weekend at Kelly's mode, but we'll save that for the next section. For now, we'll focus on the main story. It begins with Jekka trying to use a fake credit card to buy a Blu-ray player, and Nicole wonders if Jekka is just not smart enough, which I only bring up because it factors into her story, believe it or not. We see she's using a site called fraud.com, which, like, come on, and sees an ad for a free iPhone. Nicole tells her it's clearly a virus, which makes Jekka realize that if it's a computer virus, all she needs to do is use her phone instead, because that's totally how it works. And we get some admittedly good animation of them flipping their phones open, only to see them hacked by a strange man we've never seen before, who appears on the screen, someone we come to know as the Puzzler. Immediately, Jekka thinks it's an Indian guy who might be jerking off, and when he says no, she runs through a list of different ethnicities, once again showing her subtle racism she's had throughout the series. He reveals he came from the ad she clicked. I love this face from Nicole, by the way. And we get this angle shot of Jekka that, while I understand the angle, at the same time it feels kind of reminiscent of the feet angle from Flipside, which just already gives me shudders all over again. He says he can give them more than they've ever wanted, which Nicole believes means an even better iPhone, but the puzzler reveals he's been watching them all, and seen them wasting their time in front of a screen. Once again, feeling like the creator making fun of his audience like he's done a few times in the past. Which makes sense given how this story mode ends. He says he wants to test their logic and wit through puzzles, and that he'll be testing their whole city through these puzzles in a tournament, and until it's completed, no one can use their phones at all. Jekka asks what they win if they beat the tournament, and the puzzler says it'll be what their heart desires most. And beams of light start shooting through the neighborhood and seemingly across the entire world, despite him saying only the city, and a few characters in the series only saying the city. As we see several characters reacting to the puzzles before we see the puzzler saying they may not like it, but only one may understand. Okay, so this is really bad. Okay, if you know anything about Class of '09, you know that even for its world and its characters, all the situations presented within the series still felt somewhat realistic, or at least possible in the real world. This, however, is the most unrealistic, nearly sci-fi-esque thing the series has ever seen. It's such a tonal shift from everything the series has ever presented to us that it just instantly puts a bit of a bad taste in your mouth. Like, as someone who's never seen Yu-Gi-Oh, this feels like something that would be in Yu-Gi-Oh. Regardless, though, this is the setup for the game. So, well, does it live up to the rather lofty opening? No, but we're going to talk about it anyway. The game is split between 5 campaigns, featuring Nicole in an easy difficulty, Jekka in normal, Ari in hard, Emily in harder, and then Nicole and Jekka together in hardest. The first 4 stories are meant to happen all around the same time, with the final campaign taking place after the previous 4. We'll take them one at a time, starting with Nicole. The way the story is presented is the protagonist on the left and the person they're talking to on the other side, where we get to have one conversation before each puzzle, and there's 11 stages and conversations per campaign. It's supposed to be the conversations from Pokemon Puzzle League, but we'll get into that more later. Through these 5 stories, we get to meet nearly every single character, excluding basically all the teachers except Colby and Lynn, which makes sense because this game is actually meant to take place after Flipside, believe it or not. We know this through a couple clues throughout the campaigns, such as Emily and Jekka's dad discussing their relationship, which at this point has predictably failed, Jekka referencing Jeffrey getting stepped on, and the Emily route also revealing that the characters are no longer in high school. This tells us that aspects of Flipside are canon, such as the details I mentioned, but since all of the characters are alive, none of the endings can actually be canon, just like when we transitioned from the first game to Re-Up. We also don't see Nicole's mom in this game, so like I said in the Flipside video, she's probably just dead. Probably heart attack, whatever was getting her in Re-Up. With that in mind, Nicole's campaign. Every campaign starts with an inspirational quote from the puzzler, but this one doesn't really make much sense.
Sometimes just wanting life to be over with is the true key to immortality.
From here, the very first person Nicole talks to is Crispin, because, of course, Crispin is always the first person we talk to in every single game. This goes how you usually expect it to go. The art in this game is actually really pretty, and it's nice seeing the full ones once we get the actual puzzles, but even just the portraits are really nice. The UI at the bottom feels kind of childish, if that makes sense. I mean, it is inspired by Puzzle League, like I said. I even think that the colors, the blue and the yellow, is supposed to reference that it's from Pokemon. I don't know, but it feels a little out of place. Crispin goes on talking about the prize, and as Nicole says, talks a lot without really saying anything, and badly tries to flirt with Nicole. It's really annoying though, and nothing much happens here. Since we'll be skipping the actual gameplay and saving that for the gameplay section, we'll just move on. Second is Jekka, who looks really pretty in this art, and the two talk about how Nicole wishes that stupid people went to jail so they could leave all the smart ones. Jekka says that's a good idea, and when Nicole asks if she means it, Jekka turns around and shouts no, and that she should be put in jail instead, which is honestly kind of funny. Like, Jekka is really confrontational in this game, a little more than usual, and it's honestly kind of funny. Next up is Kyler, where he and Nicole discuss his inability to read, where Kyler says he totally knows how to read Dr. Seuss, referencing one of my favorite scenes in the entire series.
It's a Dr. Seuss book, you fucking dipshit!
Then we get Jeffrey, who continues talking like a weirdo, insists that he isn't gay because Nicole keeps insulting him by saying that he is for some reason, even though it's very uncomfortably plain to see that he isn't, and wants to prove that he's better at, and I quote, life and intelligence by beating her in the puzzle showdown, acting like he's in Yu-Gi-Oh!, which only a select few can actually pull off well. And guess what? He doesn't. Remember that this is a self-insert for the game's creator. This feels like some form of twisted masochism. After this is Colby. The background implies that Nicole is at school for some reason, which also happened with the background with Crispin, even though as the game established, this takes place after Flipside, so why would Nicole or any of the characters want to be at school? We also get this implication with Lynn next up too. It's the usual where Nicole gets onto Colby about being a pedophile, and they have some jokes about a boomer being unable to use a phone. After this, as mentioned, we get Lynn, who has a school hallway background, so again, is Nicole at school or something? Or why would she be? They talk about how Nicole thinks this game is perfect for Lynn because she likes testing people and rules, which she finds a little annoying. They talk about Colby, and Lynn pretends not to know what a lawsuit is, which just, holy fuck, the amount of blatant disregard for Colby's actions here is actually atrocious from Lynn. I know she had all of her talk about the staff not caring about her in the first game, and she lets Colby get away with a lot of stuff in the second game, but she is seemingly aware of what's going on and doesn't give a fuck or tries to push it under the rug. Holy shit, what a horrible principal. Next is Ari, who is glad to see Nicole is not being a man putting all their self-worth into a game, once again trying to make a dig at the audience, which this entire game kind of does, based on the ending. Ari immediately demonstrates her submissiveness again as she apologizes to Nicole even when she gets mad about Ari being happy to see her. Ari explains she's playing the game as an escape from herself, which gives us a pretty blatant hint as to what her storyline is about, and talks about how she's been doing better about her self-harm. Only for Nicole to reiterate that it's hot, because she always has just a terrible influence on everyone she's ever met, but especially Ari. She mentions a guy friend told her that it's bad, which we'll get to see in her campaign. She even says she starves herself, which Nicole also says is hot. Like, my god, Nicole, you need to just stop talking. After this, we get Emily. Oh, Emily. Secret final boss in the middle of the campaigns. But we'll get to that in the gameplay section. Anyway, we learn that Emily's on the run from the cops, but we don't learn why until her campaign. She's hopped up on 100 milligrams of Adderall and looking for even more, and says she'll walk all the way to Montana, which, given that this is the DMV area, is almost all the way across the country. Though somehow I feel like Emily would actually be able to make it somehow. Emily, the entire time, sounds like she isn't on her usual meds, and while it's probably just her hopped up on Adderall, I can't help but wonder if part of it is that she's skipping her usual meds too. And then, despite being on the run, they decide to stop and do a puzzle. That may take either 11 minutes or an hour, depending on how good you are and how lucky you are. Emily asks if she cares whether she wins or loses, and Nicole says no, but I mean, if Nicole had to spend this long working on a puzzle, I feel like she'd just give up, right? Maybe she just gets really competitive when she gets going. Next up is Nicole's brother, who still doesn't have an actual name, by the way. He seems to be in an arcade, which is crazy because it means he actually managed to leave the house, which has never happened. He then asks Nicole to show her tits or leave, which is just blah. Gross. Definitely leads into that idea I had about the incestuous stuff, so he calls her gay instead, which is accurate at least, and says that being good at games is important. Nicole says that people who play games don't get girls, which is completely false for all genders, and they play to prove who's right. For the penultimate fight, we get Dark Jeffrey, which is essentially Jeffrey, but right before he commits the school shooting, wearing the Punisher outfit and talking in his more emotionless voice. He claims that the puzzler is his master, and that he's realized that trying to appeal to women or appease them is useless. We also see the text shrink to be able to fit in the box, which I believe only happens with Jeffrey because of his dumbass Chuny monologues, and the puzzler, which makes sense. He talks about the puzzler being the only one to accept him in his time of despair, which I could see as being despair that he doesn't have a good job like we learned in that one text of the first game, but also just referring to his failure to talk to people like Nicole and especially Ari later on. He says once he beats Nicole, all of the puzzler's secrets will become clear, which is sort of hinting towards the final campaign. He ends by saying he'll become Puzzle Shogun. After defeating him, we finally meet the puzzler properly. Nicole says she just wants to get this over with, and the puzzler asks if that's how she approaches life, and how she seemed to be impatient and impulsive for a long time. Nicole gets frustrated and says she's annoyed he sent a future mass shooter after her, only for him to say it's not in the future, but rather in an alternate timeline. A somewhat heavy-handed way to reference the multiple timelines aspect of the series, and says that he could have done that if the puzzler hadn't shown up, which feels really, really weird to say. Like, that's a lot of goodwill to bestow upon himself, saying it's because of him that Jeffrey didn't kill a bunch of people. I almost feel like the puzzler is meant as another sort of self-insert for SBN3, another godlike figure in the series, and so it feels almost annoying for him to go, yeah, in another timeline he was a school shooter, but in this one, I kept him off that path. I don't know, something about it feels a bit wrong to me. However, he says that he's probably not entirely saved and might in fact be one small event off from shooting people, so there's that at least. He says the puzzles serve many different purposes, which we'll get to, and how everybody was already digitally hostage to their phones, and he just changed the method of it all. Which would feel more fitting as a thing to say in the modern age, but I suppose it could also apply to 2009, 2010 as well. Nicole says she wants to go back because she was, and then cuts herself off. He finishes her sentence by saying happy before then stating the obvious, that Nicole wasn't happy even before the puzzles were here. Which we know due to her being very clearly depressed throughout the entire series, as I've discussed before. And they finally play. When it's over, her phone returns to normal, and she asks what she's supposed to do now. Each of the 4 original campaigns has a short ending cutscene like this. Each story follows a sort of theme, and Nicole's is essentially that she just kind of goes with the flow. She does whatever she can to try and return to normalcy, even though she'll never truly be happy, likely ever again. She coasts through life to try and get to the next thing, the next day, the next event, and doesn't ever aim for anything higher than that. She's stuck where she is and could never do better because she'll never attempt to. Even when forced to do something insane like fighting a dozen people in puzzle battles, it's all just to get back to normal because she wants her phone back. She doesn't care about the tournament for the prize. She literally just hopes that winning the tournament means things will just go back to normal, and she'll do her best to get it over with. I'll be honest, her storyline feels the least connected to the main theme I've come up with, as you'll see, but at the same time, I find it hard to really even care enough. So let's just move on to the next storyline, which is Jekka's.
Sometimes the best way to prove yourself is by proving nothing at all.
Once again, it feels like it's meant to be alluding to the theme of this route, but it's just some cookie-cutter nonsense. Maybe that's the point, I'm not sure. She starts by going against Kyler, which she mentioned when going against Nicole in her campaign. Kyler talks about how when he goes pro in lacrosse, Jekka will be all over him, and she talks about how he's too stupid to do anything, especially win at this puzzle game, which he believes will make him a billionaire. Kyler says that girls like Jekka are the real dumb ones, which obviously Jekka disagrees with, especially coming from Kyler, and sets up the theme of this campaign, which we'll discuss later. Second is Nicole, which we're going to skip because we've seen it already, but I'll just remind you that they discussed Nicole's idea of stupid people going to jail, because it fits the theme somewhat. Third is Jeffrey, where he once again talks in a weird voice. One that Jekka feels the need to point out, and Jeffrey directly says, "I bet you don't like this game because it requires a lot of quick thinking," displaying his general misogynistic tendencies on the same level as in Flipside, because not only does he call her stupid, saying her IQ isn't as high as his, but saying that all women are, according to some BS research, on the whole, not as intelligent as men. What an absolute piece of shit. Jekka also brings up paying women to step on him, referencing Flipside and her knowledge of that stuff, like I mentioned at the start, showing the first hint that this is a post-Flipside game. Jekka really shows her anger in this conversation, especially along with being meaner to Nicole than usual last stage. Though I kinda like it. Next is, unfortunately, her father. This conversation is reminiscent of Flipside, where he talks about dating, insults her mother, discusses how he sometimes splurges her inheritance money, but surprisingly he doesn't yell at her a single time, even when she talks back to him more than we ever saw on Flipside. It's a little cathartic, but also feels a bit strange at the same time. But hey, I'm definitely not gonna complain. He also calls his daughter stupid, but blames it on her cosmetics and socializing, which doesn't even make all that much sense, but to be fair, he barely made any sense to begin with. The most frustrating thing here was that this stage was the first time I ever lost in my playthrough, and it just felt extra insulting. After this, we get Emily. Once again, she talks about how she's taken several Adderall, and Jekka says essentially that no, video games are fun, which, whatever, we get it, and how idiotic these people can be sometimes. She discusses wanting to get the phone and sell it for $500, which is $781.04 today. We're bringing it back, baby! Sorry, I get really excited about it. To get a fuck ton of Xanax. Even though Jekka points out how there's another prize other than the phone, but that's all Emily is really focused on. Emily then asks if she wants to buy a ring, which we'll learn the origin of in her campaign, but Jekka turns her down. Next up is a cop, which you'd think would be a reference towards Jekka being traumatized by one in Ria, but that doesn't actually come to pass. He explains that new laws have been made due to puzzling having taken over the city, and that one of the laws is that chains of 3 times or higher are banned. Which I don't actually know if that affects gameplay, because I steamrolled this guy when I got here, and I don't think it does, because we learned he doesn't want Jekka to go to City Hall and check the new laws, revealing he's just trying to make it easier for him to win. Next, we get Colby again, who calls Jekka Smiles, and Jekka says she only ever had an awkward smile in his class from when he smacked her ass in front of everyone, and how he got suspended from teaching for a month after that. He says he came back, and Jekka says that's only because he threatened the principal. We learned in the first game that Mr. White had photos of Lynn, so it wouldn't be a stretch to think Colby could have some too. He starts going off about political correctiveness or whatever, and then says he'll show Jekka just how dumb she is by beating her in the game. Stage 8 is a brand new named character, which I certainly wasn't expecting going into this game, other than the puzzler, obviously, but considering who he is, I doubt he'll show up again if there's ever another game. The man reveals himself in an alley wearing the Kamiya glasses for some reason, calling himself the Chustler, or Chain Hustler. He talks with such a weird accent that Jekka can't pin down what he's supposed to be, which, the way she phrases it, makes it feel like another instance of her being somewhat racist, but I think it's more a joke on how the character is voiced, so I'm not even sure if I should count that or not. He talks about how good he is at making chains, and Jekka challenges him to a battle. I think this is the only male character in this route who doesn't insult her intelligence. Stage 9 is Ari, where Ari tells Jekka that Jeffrey's acting weird. No, really, what's new about that? And that he wanted to go out with her, so Ari had to tell him she was gay, which apparently she's still not eager to tell to just anyone, despite the fact that it's basically already obvious to everyone. She says he thought acknowledging her sexuality would make her change it for him, which, well, unfortunately you get to see in the next campaign, but it's already gross just hearing it. Jekka says he doesn't understand human beings, and Ari agrees with her, with Jekka then saying only girls seem to think she's smart, as almost every guy in the campaign has called her stupid in some way or another. Jekka says that she wants to play Ari, but Ari tells her she was enjoying the conversation, saying it in such a way that I can't help but interpret as her having a slight crush on Jekka, because, as we know, she's a bit desperate given her position. Plus, considering these two have kind of shown feelings for each other a few times throughout the series, I wouldn't be surprised if this was what the game was going for. The penultimate stage is once again Dark Jeffrey, but this won't be the case every time. He talks again about the puzzler accepting him without judgment, which again just feels like a stretch for this random guy who appeared out of nowhere, but alright. He manages to insult Jekka's intelligence again as he says he tried to plead with her but she wouldn't listen, and now just feels nothing anymore. I know we only get to see snippets of his own little story, but I'll be honest, this whole turn doesn't feel justified the same way it does for the school shooter route. Maybe that's just me, though. He says the puzzles aren't that intellectually stimulating, which, like, way to go insulting the thing your supposed master fucking created, you moron. Finally, we meet the puzzler once again. Jekka asks if he's surprised she won because Jeffrey, his henchman, kept calling her stupid, and rants that everybody she plays against thinks that because she's beautiful, she has to also be stupid, probably not helped by being blonde and dressing preppy. The puzzler essentially tells her that even he doesn't know what it takes to beat the puzzles. And this seems to make Jekka somewhat sad, as he points out even if you're good at games, it doesn't make you intelligent enough to do stuff that actually matters. Which is a very fair point. And although I criticize Jeffrey for insulting his master's puzzles, it is funny that the puzzler basically calls them useless here too. She asks why he's making them do this, and avoids the question by challenging her. Then, after beating him, the short cutscene shows Jekka getting her phone back before asking what the point of it all was. Jekka's storyline is pretty simple, that being that she wants people to think she's intelligent despite almost every man she comes across only seeing her beauty and thinking she has nothing else to offer. They essentially see her as the stereotype of the big, blonde, dumb girl with big boobs, and upsets her. And while I wouldn't call Jekka the smartest person in the world, she's definitely not stupid, especially when you consider it's people like Kyler saying this, who is literally mentally challenged. She believes the puzzles prove that she's smart, only for the puzzler to make her question if that's actually the case, and then, just like that, it's all over, leaving her likely feeling empty, confused, and probably frustrated. And with that, we move on to Ari's story.
Depression shows in many forms. The most notable, trying anything and everything just to distract from it.
This is the quote that has felt the most substantial so far, as it's very true that the worst kind of depression is the one where you do anything and everything to avoid thinking about it, which will be demonstrated by Ari using this puzzle showdown as a way to escape her own depression. The first conversation is with Kelly, who doesn't remember Ari's name, which I find funny not only because Kelly doesn't remember the girl she potentially almost made out with in sex rehab, but because that's also a fitting person to include with Ari, someone dealing with depression and loneliness from being gay, as the first person she interacts with. Further cementing that loneliness since even the next most likely gay girl won't go out with her. Kelly initially calls her Carrie, spelled C-A-R-I, which is admittedly kind of close, and when Ari tells her that's wrong, she tries to cover it up by saying she was only referencing the name of a horror movie from the 70s, before referencing FYE, adding on to what we discussed in the main series about how Kelly makes a lot of movie references because of her job. Ari talks about the puzzle game being good for her to use to focus on instead of other stuff, though when Kelly asks what other stuff, she clams up and doesn't tell her, with my guess being the whole cutting stuff, since she kinda says that later on. They agree to play. Next is Crispin, where they talk about playing the game, and Ari once again talks about using the game as an escape. Crispin asks what she's escaping from, and Ari admits it's her depression and feelings of isolation, and how it got bad enough that she cut herself. Crispin pretends to relate to her and tells her cutting herself is bad, which is the guy that Ari referenced in the Nicole conversation we'll get to see later, and how she got depression from being gay in high school. Crispin accidentally agrees with this, and Ari asks if he's gay. He lamely says yes, and Ari says if he ever needs to talk to someone, she's available. He wants to get her number, and she says she can't because of the phones being hacked, but it seems like if they weren't, she would have done it, meaning this is probably the closest Crispin gets to succeeding outside of Nicole's suicide route, but I don't think that counts. Crispin instead offers to come over to her house directly and cuddle, which tips Ari off that he isn't gay, which, I mean, personally, I think you can cuddle with anyone if you're close enough with them, even if you aren't dating. But to be fair, Crispin, even if he was gay, is definitely not close enough to Ari to do that. Anyway, she talks about her knife that we learned about in the sex rehab scene, and he asks if they can settle it with the puzzle. Next up is the Chustler again, unfortunately. He goes off as usual about destroying people with chains, and Ari asks what he did before the puzzles, to which he lived in a certain part of town that Ari says was really good, so it's not like he's from the bad part of town or anything like that, which I think is just kind of a funny joke. This one doesn't really give us much, though. So let's move on to stage 4, which is Kyler. He immediately launches into the "I bet you're only gay because you haven't dated the right man" thing, which is always gross. He talks about how he's the best man for her because he's played a lot of lacrosse, and then sounds genuinely insulted when she asks if that's actually a sport or not. He says she's going to hell for being gay, and Ari shouts that she knew he started the straight club, which is a fun callback to the hate crime route in Re-Up, but the way it's phrased here almost makes it feel like it was the canon ending to this route, though I'm likely just overthinking it. Ari says he should read more books, but Kyler says reading is gay. A more minor running joke is that I think every conversation with Kyler references the fact that he can't and chooses not to read, really digging into that one joke for him. I mean, it's fine, but it's kind of noticeable. He claims his IQ is 98, which I doubt given that we learned he's intellectually challenged in a previous game like I mentioned before. After this, we get the obligatory Jeffrey stage, where he starts by bringing up a video game Ari has never talked about with him before. This actually happens to be the 4th Jak and Daxter game, which was actually never released, since the studio that made it eventually went on to do The Last of Us and Uncharted, and then mostly focus on those two franchises from then on. Jeffrey then launches into calling Ari cute, which I mean, I agree, but also, again, socially awkward and doesn't understand that it's a bit creepy to just say that out of nowhere. He even says he loves her, but she tells him she's gay so she can't love him back. He says he understands, but is sad that the last girl he had a chance with is gay, only for Ari to let him know that even if she was straight, she wouldn't date him. He talks about being in perpetual loneliness, and Ari says she knows how he feels, so she offers to be his friend instead. He agrees, and the two have a friendly puzzle match. After this, we come across Colby again, who immediately starts flirting with Ari because, of course, he does. Ari asks if he had sexual harassment complaints, and he says he still does, directly saying he thinks his students are hot. Ari tells him that's bad, and he says everything is bad these days, even fast food, and Ari agrees that it is bad for him, and that he should eat more of it, which I just find really funny, her basically indirectly telling him to just kill himself. She continues on by also saying he should eat bacon grease before asking his age, and he says he's 50-something, to which she lies and says the risk of cardiac arrest is cut in half after 50, when it's probably the opposite. He says he wants to work up an appetite by going against her. Next is Nicole, which we've already seen, and Ari is being very lovey towards Nicole, made more obvious by the way she's treated other girls even in this campaign so far, which almost makes me think again that maybe hate crime is canon to this timeline. As a reminder, she talks about playing this game as an escape from herself and cutting herself, which Nicole says is hot, but Ari says someone told her is bad. Crispin. We come across Jeffrey again doing his usual darkness stuff, though he then does the thing where he returns to his normal voice when seeing Ari, like a friend pulling someone out of the darkness. Totally anime, fitting for him, but honestly really cringe considering it's fucking Jeffrey and Ari wasn't really that close to him in any way. She asks him about the trench coat, and he explains that it's part of his apprenticeship, and that he needs to isolate himself from distractions. She asks if that's what's best, and he explains that maybe he should have considered empathy towards her because he doesn't want to be homophobic, obviously. He thanks her for being his friend despite both of them being lonely, but then finally fucks it up by essentially saying, "Hey, we're both lonely, so who cares that you're gay? Let's be in a relationship anyway!" How the fuck do you have a self-insert that is this bad? That literally everyone else talks about being rightfully creepy and weird and wrong and go, "Yeah, that's my self-insert." Like, what the fuck? What? He asks why they can't just cuddle and hang out, which, again, if you're close enough to someone and there's no romantic feelings, I think that can work. But Ari rightfully points out how in this instance, that wouldn't be fair, because Jeffrey would essentially have the girlfriend he wants, but Ari would still have nothing. Then he has the gall to say she's being selfish for being gay. Like, seriously, what the fuck, Jeffrey? With this, he reaffirms he doesn't need any women or anybody else, just himself and the puzzles. Funnily enough, though, is that he also goes out of his way to mention Emily here, probably just as foreshadowing for the final campaign. Then we get the Jekka scene where Ari tells Jekka about what happened with Jeffrey. Not much to mention other than Ari wanted to talk more with Jekka, but she wants to play. Next up is Emily, where they discuss religion and how Emily thinks Ari could be gay and religious if she wanted to be a human doormat, which, to be fair, given how Ari is, she kinda can be sometimes. Ari says she'd turn religious if they put her in jail, and Emily reveals she has Satan tattoos that we just never get to see, though I believe we first learn about them in the Suicide Pact ending in Re-Up. I can't recall, though. Ari asks to see, which feels like undertones of wanting to see Emily naked, but Emily notices this and says she's tweaked out on Adderall and doesn't have time for a gay girl to be hitting on her, and Ari asks how they can always tell. To be fair, we know Emily is bisexual, so maybe in another timeline, though this feels like an even worse combo than Ari and Nicole, to be honest. Emily compares Ari to Jeffrey getting no girls, and the two play. Finally is the Puzzler, where he starts by saying he knows Ari wasn't playing for a prize, that she was simply playing to chase a distraction from her depression and loneliness. He asks if her problems went away at all, though, and if it was worth it, and she says she doesn't know. She talks to herself about how the game only served to make her encounter all the things she already knew. He says there's a lesson to learn from this, that she should focus on herself and not the games. Ari asks what the point of the game is, and he says only the true winner will get to know that. He tells her to work on her loneliness first and foremost, and how she's only deflecting from her problems. She says she'll beat him and find out what his deal is, only for us to see her in her bedroom after, asking if she won and lamenting that she's still gay, depressed, and lonely, and asks what the point of it all was. Ari's story is pretty cut and dry. She's depressed and lonely from being gay, which, if we look back at Nicole's ending speech in the Get Dumped ending, she talks about how despite straight guys and gay or bisexual girls being into women, they'll never be able to bond over it. It sort of calls back to that idea with how most of the men she encountered in this route, and even some of the girls, treated her gayness like it wasn't something super serious, or that it was flexible, or a lie, or anything else. She used the game as a distraction instead of trying to find a real solution to her problems. And now that it's over and done with, there's no real solution. She's still the same as she always was, and the game did nothing to change that. She has to be the one to change it herself, and yet she feels like she can't because she believes she's already tried everything she can, when in reality she still has so many avenues she could take. It's another storyline of using the game to make yourself feel better when all it does is distract you from facing your problems for yourself. And with that, we move on to Emily's campaign.
Sometimes you just have to say, "What the fuck is wrong with this bitch?"
This isn't really anything meaningful, but it is funny. We start with Colby, who asks to play a friendly game of the puzzles. Emily says she wants the prize, and he says he loves something more. In outing with Emily, she reiterates that he's 3 times her age, and he says that he says the same thing he did back when he had them as students. Once again reiterating that they're not in high school anymore. Age is just a number. And jail is just a room. Colby then boasts about his fancy watch, and Emily asks to borrow his watch to go into a Gucci store. In exchange, when she comes back, she'll have sex with him. He tries to give her a condition, but she keeps shooting him down until he eventually says he'll only do it if she can beat him in the puzzle, before becoming pathetic enough to say she doesn't even have to win, he just wants to play. Next is Kyler, and within a few seconds the conversation turns racist by Kyler saying he doesn't know any black people. No, I won't explain. Anyway, Emily asks if he wants to buy her watch, and in return he asks if she wants to buy his MP3 player, which isn't even branded. She tries to use the same method of asking Kyler to let her borrow it. He only agrees to it if she beats him as the puzzle, confident that he'll win. She wants to take some Adderall first because she says she can't enjoy the game without it, and the two play. Next up is Jekka's dad, which may be confusing until you remember the part in Flipside where these two dated. The dad talks about how Emily barely texts him anymore, in 3 months, giving us a good timeline for this game being likely in late summer 2009. Supported by the fact that one of the girls asked why Jeffrey was wearing a black coat in the summer. She talks about how he can't spell right and said, "I jove you," and he says he meant to put an L, to which Emily says it's the only L he's ever avoided, which is a good burn in my book. He asks for them to bond over a round of puzzles instead, and Emily demands $40, which he gives into, which is $62.48 today. After this, we get Kelly, who says hi, and Emily immediately gets paranoid, thinking she's angry about Emily stealing from FYE a lot. Kelly asks how she's been since high school, and Emily says she's tried ketamine, then asks if Kelly wants to buy the MP3 player for $20, which is $31.24 today. She doesn't bite, and Emily offers the watch, but Kelly points out that it's a fake because the Rolex has 2 L's. Emily then asks how the dumbest slut she knew is suddenly such an expert, and I love my girl, but that feels like an apt description for Kelly. Emily offers to play Kelly in a puzzle with a bet, saying Kelly can offer her purity ring, which she says she got so God can make sure she doesn't stray, feeding into the joke that started in the sex rehab and re-up. Emily offers the MP3 player in exchange, and they agree once Emily baits Kelly into it, and Emily takes more Adderall before they start. Stage 5 is Jekka, where she talks about being 5 Adderalls in before noon, which Jekka says is a new record. She asks if she wants to buy the ring, and takes another Adderall before playing. After this is Jeffrey, who greets Emily and directly asks her to be friends, to which Emily immediately says no, obviously. He says he wants to become friends with someone first, and hope it leads to true love, to which Emily says he should just give up. However, when Jeffrey questions this, Emily says that maybe he can up his game if he buys her watch, adding that girls will be all over him if he buys it. When she asks if she would be too, she hesitantly says yes, that he would own her body, to which he says he really likes her body, which makes her talk about his true love stuff was just BS. Not that anyone is likely surprised by this. She tries selling it for $50, which is $78.10 today. He isn't sure at first until she offers $60 for both it and the MP3 player, which is $93.72 today. He takes the deal and asks how he looks, and she replies that he looks like a gross nerd with a fake watch and tries to leave, saying she only likes people with perks and Mustangs and MS-13 members, calling back to her boyfriend being in the gang and re-up. He challenges her to a puzzle, and once again she takes another Adderall. Next up is Lynn, which feels a bit random, who stops her to ask her why she's in a rush, and that one of the faculty reported a stolen watch. And Emily gives herself away by saying it's a he when Lynn didn't specify, though she easily could have wormed her way out of that, but she's probably too high to come up with that. And Lynn challenges her to a puzzle, which I'm guessing she does to stall her, and saying she wants to have a talk, and they decide to play. Stage 8 is Nicole, which is where she's talking to Nicole about running from the cops and how she's taken 100 milligrams of Adderall and wants to walk to Montana. Stage 9 is a police officer who's stopping her because she matches the description of someone he's looking for that was reported to have stolen a ring. Even though, didn't Kelly bet that away? I guess she could have still called the cops if she thought it was unfairly taken or something. She almost screws herself over a second time by mentioning the watch when the cops didn't say a word about it, and she even mocks his voice thinking he was about to pounce on that before he mentions the ring.
I didn't say a word.
She tries to deflect, and when he calls her hair bleach blonde, she insults him, and he actually apologizes before he tries bringing her in, and she says he'll have to beat her in a puzzle first. He says that even if he loses, he can just shoot her anyway, and they play. I really wish we got a follow-up conversation to see how she got out of this, like seriously. The penultimate one is Ari, as Emily doesn't actually go against Jeffrey a second time, strangely enough. As a reminder, Ari and Emily talk about religion, and Ari flirts with her. Emily shoots her down. Then finally is the puzzler. It starts with Emily asking where she is, and the puzzler says that it's the last place she hasn't run to. He tries to talk to her and make metaphors, but she just isn't having it and it ends up confusing him. She asks if she'll get the phone once she beats him, and he says that usually he has a talk with the person, but that right now he can't really pin her on anything, harkening back to his quote from the start being the least metaphorical one or whatever, and just straight up not knowing what to do about her. She asks to hurry up and play to get the Xanax, and he uses that as his in, and he asks if that's all life ever is for her. Chasing drugs to escape being sober at any point, and escape herself, essentially. However, she misinterprets this as well and admits she wasn't actually going to walk all the way to Montana. He gets frustrated and asks what he's supposed to do with Emily, that it's his job to monitor everyone, find out what makes them tick, and use his words to make them second guess everything. But Emily is impossible because she doesn't give thought to the world around her. She asks what the point is, but he fails to tell her before saying that the motives will be revealed in due time, aka the next and final campaign, and that only the one who needs it most will be allowed to hear it. The two play, and in the final cutscene, it actually looks like Emily loses, funnily enough, before the phone is back to normal. And Emily doesn't really care, as she's just focused on getting more Adderall. I basically said it already, but Emily's storyline is that she constantly chases money to buy drugs, using those drugs to avoid being sober at all costs, and she'll do anything to reach that state of being high. My guess is that she doesn't want to be sober due to her mental illnesses, and that's why she's so desperate and single-minded on this goal. The way she talks throughout this campaign, while I know it's because she's high on Adderall, it actually feels like it calls back to how she acted in Re-Up, when she was off her meds. I don't know if that's the intention, but it feels possible that once she became an adult, she stopped taking her meds and instead relied on drugs to avoid being sober and addressing her issues. She once again used the game as a sort of distraction from her real problems, albeit in a less direct way than some of the others. And that brings us to the final campaign, which features Jekka and Nicole together.
You can't call it a game until all parties are voluntary. Anything else would be torture.
Parts of this game are torture, yes. Not all of it, but parts of it. It seems like he's trying to say that this game is something that everyone is willingly participating in, like how he told Ari that she could have simply waited until someone else finished the game for her, but she chose to play anyway, and we'll come to see that Nicole and Jekka chose to play again when they didn't need to. We'll get a quick flash to the suicide ending in this quote as well, which makes sense given that the puzzler references this ending in the final cutscene. We start with the two girls confronting the puzzler at the beginning this time. He mocks them by saying that for two people who complained about his puzzles, it's funny they opened it back up again. But both of them are here because they both beat him and got nothing. He says they got what their heart desires most, and they disagree, so he tells them that the first victory was a sort of checkpoint. Jekka asks for the prize, and he says it's on the way, but they have to work for it little by little. When they push him more, he says there's only one thing standing between them and the prize. A final challenge, that they must beat his puzzle shoguns, the best of the best. Meaning Jeffrey's turn for himself was unfortunately real. He decides to start them off by fighting him, the puzzler himself, to which Nicole calls him lonely. Second is, of course, Dark Jeffrey. He says he's now fully educated in the art of isolation, which just sounds so fucking lame, and that they will no longer tempt him into throwing the match. Given the fact they never did that intentionally, which they even point out, I have to believe he thinks that losing to them is so impossible that he must have just thrown the game subconsciously. Which is just aggravating that he doubts them that much, if that's the case. Jeffrey talks about the prize at the end being more than he ever dreamed, the meaning of life itself. Nicole says that the meaning of life is killing herself so you have full control over it, which is interesting for her to say given the multiple references to the suicide ending in this route. He says there's no sense of pursuing women of the world of the living when animated ones will gladly accept him, which is also just really weird and dumb to say. Jeffrey also promises that this time they won't win. So they do, and next is, of all people, Nicole's brother. He talks about how he's done so well that even the puzzlers congratulated him personally, and how he's been getting hit up by girls all day. And of course, they are underage girls. Jekka references the police showing up at their house again, which implies he's been arrested before and somehow got out, but given that's implied to be possible in the prison ending and re-up, that's honestly not too far out there. Unfortunately. Jekka and Nicole agree that they absolutely need to stop him from winning. Stage 4 is Colby, which feels like another surprise, and they question how he's a shogun. He says that it's about the energy, not skills, and how Nicole needs to learn that before entering the workforce. But since we all know Nicole is never going to do that, it's meaningless. The pair argue a bit, but none of it is particularly interesting, and so Colby says he's going to kill them in the puzzle, and then says the pressure is so much that it might make them choke, which I'm pretty sure is a reference to the choked out ending of the first game. When Jekka asks what pressure, he says that if they lose, he'll kidnap them and sell them to a trafficking ring in Ohio, which then Jekka screams,
Anything but Ohio!
which is funny on its own, but also seems like a reference to the slave ending in Flipside. This last campaign in particular references a bunch of routes from the past, which feels intentional. However, Nicole and Jekka turn around by saying they'll sell Colby to a gay old man fetishist underground ring. He says he's not gay, and Nicole ominously says that he doesn't need to be. To which Colby shudders, which makes his fear very evident and makes me very happy. And they play. Next up is the Chusler. Yes, these are all men, not a single woman, unsurprisingly. Jekka says no one can tell what race he is, and the man keeps going on and on like usual until they question what he did before this, to which he reveals he was a battle rapper. He shouts out some lyrics that are apparently so bad that Jekka says they can know for sure now that he isn't black. This makes him so mad that he starts the battle. The penultimate fight of this campaign is the cop, and the two girls tell him that they want to report Nicole's brother and Colby, but he tells them that the puzzles have made all the cops in town go rogue, and how he serves the puzzler as his final obstacle for the girls. Nicole asks what happens if they lose, and he says they'll never be able to commit crimes ever again. Nicole says that they don't commit crimes, and Jekka immediately tells her to be real. And then the cop tries to go for some Star Wars dark side speech about them having a divide between them that doesn't amount to anything. Nicole reasons that he'll murder them if they lose, and he says murder is only an unjustified killing, which, strictly speaking, isn't true, but whatever. They agree, and the fight begins. With this, we once again reach the puzzler. He says he didn't expect to see them back so soon, telling them it's funny how they're so determined with something they previously found to be so tedious. They tell him they just want the prize, not the puzzles, and he points out how they were the ones that chose to keep going when they simply could have put it down whenever they wanted. He talks about how the game grew more difficult, describing a learning curve turning eventually into a spiral, and Jekka says they've been going down into a spiral long before he got here, which is extremely true. He asks if they seek the meaning of life, and Nicole, surprisingly wisely, says that's different for each person. The puzzler sort of agrees and says that it's always changing depending on what society wants, and asks for out of them. And Nicole and Jekka say they're pretty sure they would know what life would want out of them on their own. The puzzler says that the final puzzle is the only way to find out. After he's beaten, there's a final animated cutscene. Now, bear with me for this stuff, because Jekka and Nicole are suddenly summoned into this dark void where they ask if they're dead. And the puzzler asks if they were ever truly alive. Good question, and I think you could argue either side, but for Nicole, I think no, at least not since her father's death. He calls their intentions for the game shallow, to which Jekka shouts that he's the one that forced them into this. He says that if the ad said to solve world hunger or to help kids or animals, nobody would have clicked, and they actually agree with him. When they do, we get that background noise again, the one from the previous games that's usually saved for dire, important, or stressful moments.
I'm not really interested in any of those.
You see, that same mind on the autopilot of short-term convenience.
Tonight, when my mom's out with her new boyfriend, I'm gonna take the entire bottle. I'm going to kill myself.
I like that it's still being used even here. He asks if they felt accomplished beating people, and Jekka says yes, but only to get to the end, and he asks what that truly brought them, asking if anything is different at all from when they started, and Nicole says no because they were distracted doing this, which he says is exactly the point. All the people they faced, like Jeffrey, Nicole's brother, they all wasted hours of their lives on this game, only for it to mean nothing in the end. Jekka says they played it for fun, and the puzzler says people are fun, to which Nicole disagrees, same, and he asks if she's ever drawn amusement from the stupidity of others. And she actually agrees with that, at least. He points out how this fun was all put into a digital form instead of put out into the real world, and both girls asks why they needed to be here for all of this. Then, he says,
Books, puzzles, and pawns. Are you familiar?
How'd you... I'm not.
another version of the background noise again. Now, this part is probably the most interesting thing in the game to me. Obviously, the puzzler referenced that Jeffrey was a school shooter in another timeline in Nicole's campaign, but not only is he referencing Nicole's suicide here after it was referenced multiple times throughout this campaign, but Nicole's reaction means that even now, when she hasn't committed suicide, she still has thought about her suicide enough to have that phrasing in her mind, and it leaves her so rattled that she's still dwelling about it even when we cut back to her in a moment. She is and always has been depressed and suicidal to the point that she's given it this much thought. He somehow knows about these alternate timelines, more than he should. The puzzler says that in another timeline, Jekka would have been familiar with those three words as well. Also referencing Jekka's route in Flipside where she discovered Nicole's suicide, referencing both perspectives of that entire event as we then get a close-up of Nicole silently freaking out while Jekka, sounding far away and almost underwater, says she's confused. Again, I do genuinely really like this part for the references and what it could mean, and kind of the tragedy of it all, even if it's not fully explored. He goes on to say that he can only give them the pieces to put life back together, and that the puzzle itself was never relevant, only the one solving it. Nicole asks why he's telling them all of this, and the puzzler, after a pause, says he isn't telling them. He says he just needed them here so he could talk to them. He then looks at the camera, at us, showing us his eyes for the first time. He says only we can break this pattern, and that the opportunity to do something real is out there in the real world. Finally, he says he can help us with the first step, and says goodbye. The game flashes the words, "Go outside," and closes. And that's the end. Yes, the entire point of the game, and the entire point of the puzzles, was to have the puzzler, who is another sort of stand-in for SBN3, tell us to go outside. Now, while this does feel sort of dumb at first, and it did to me, trust me, at the same time, I kind of love it. This entire series has had that sort of idea to it. The menu for every single Class of 09 game, including this one, says go outside as its way to exit the game. At the start, it asks you, why are you playing this? The thesis of the series, and this game in particular, has always sort of been that you should go out and enjoy life. This game shows us through these characters that they use the puzzles as distractions from their world and their problems, and by extension, so have we. We play video games for many reasons, for fun, as an escape, whatever it may be. But this game tells us that none of it compares to what you could find in the real world. And honestly, as dumb as that message is for a video game to be telling you, I do actually kind of like it. If only it wasn't so crippled by the gameplay. And as for who the puzzler is and why he knows about other timelines and all that, again, it's likely just another sort of stand-in for SBN3 as another godlike figure in this world, like what's been another minor theme throughout the series. I don't imagine you're supposed to care or question it too much, which feels kinda silly, but that's on brand for him in this series, I suppose. Regardless, I really do like all the references to various routes and the past games as a whole, making it feel like it's trying to tie this world together into something more cohesive, maybe even trying to confirm an ending or two, and giving us an even further look into the future beyond the high school aspect of their lives that Flipside initially explored with half of its game. Weekend at Kelly's goes even further, and in some routes show us 2010, or even go so far as 2029, which is the furthest we've seen so far, but we'll get there. For the main story, it seems kind of dumb on the surface, but ultimately I think it's interesting with some fun stuff to talk about and fascinating implications for the series and its characters as a whole. I just really wish it wasn't so diminished by the core gameplay, but we'll talk about that later. For now, let's move on to the second main part of the game, Weekend at Kelly's. I'm not gonna mince words. I think the Kelly stuff is more interesting than the main story, and I'll explain why. Weekend at Kelly's is essentially the same layout as the original visual novels, but with a puzzle element added. You get a starting cutscene, play 5 levels that steadily get harder by getting faster, and then you get to make a choice, leading you to one of 2 new scenes. These splits happen 3 times, leading to 5 cutscenes per route if you include the first in each one, and 5 groups of levels for a total of 25, with some dialogue from Kelly between each individual level. On top of this, each cutscene leads to a brand new CG, and all of them are really pretty, featuring Kelly in a bunch of different outfits, most of which are really good on her. And let me tell you, some of the situations she finds herself in are absolutely insane, even for a series like this, and one ending even takes us all the way to the year 2029. But I'm getting ahead of myself. We'll take this route by route the same way we would a normal Class of 09 game. And thankfully, the pathing for this is way more in line with Flipside than the first 2 games, so it'll be much easier to talk about. We start with a CG that's somewhat reminiscent of the first CG of Flipside, with Kelly sitting on her bed. We can see her room for the first time, and at first I thought it was weird she has a chandelier until I remembered she was rich, which she says a moment later. She says she doesn't know us very well, but wants to invite us to hang out for the weekend, and apologizes because she isn't good at making friends. Which, given that we barely see her interact with anyone besides Jekka, makes a lot of sense. She talks about how people think she's boring because her parents are rich, but that her parties can get really crazy. We arrive at the party, and immediately we can see Jekka talking to who looks to be Hunter, which would make sense if it's him given he drowns in the pool later, but it's weird Jekka is talking to him and looking so happy. But she's the only girl we recognize at the party. Again, though, it kinda makes sense considering she doesn't really have much interaction with any of the other girls. Kelly tells us the party is going well and that only 8 girls have been sexually assaulted, which is a record low. Please, Jekka, run away, I'm begging you. And 2 guys are also assaulted, but just like every other girl in the series, they don't care when it's a guy. Of course. Also, I'm sure that even at this moment, someone is probably having sex in one of the bedrooms. I wonder how many strangers have had sex in Kelly's bed at her parties. That would be really creepy. Ugh. She says they're gonna play a game, but not to worry since it's not as hard as Shoots the Ladders. So, what, is it Candyland? No, it's the main puzzle. As we play through the levels, she compliments our playing ability, even saying it's hot at one point before taking it back immediately after, and saying, cocaine is like a drug. No kidding! Once we finish this up, she asks if we want to go out to eat somewhere because she's hungry, or go to her pool, which we've heard about a few times in the series but have never seen. We choose to go to this infamous pool, and we get to see Kelly in a, I'll be honest, far too revealing swimsuit, which is the same one that we've actually seen in a merch poster before. She says she doesn't want to actually get in the pool because it'll ruin her swimsuit, and she wants to take pictures. I mean, do I really need to explain what's wrong with that? Between the levels, she talks about how guys text her after she uploads photos, but she usually forgets to ignore them. Hunter comes in and asks to swim in here, and Kelly agrees so long as he's not suicidal, since she doesn't want to pull out another body from the pool, which just brings on so many questions. She talks about getting a religious tattoo and asks what religion she should get, and I suggest getting one of those that has the word, where every letter is made of different symbols from different religions. Don't know if you guys know what I'm talking about. If I remember to put this in later, I'll put something on the screen. At the end, she says someone is drowning, which is Hunter, and for some reason he calls out Uno, and she says they could try helping him, or take more photos, making me think of that one meme with the drowning person in the background. For this route, we decide to take more photos, and we cut ahead a year to 2010, where we get to see Kelly become a model in what looks like lingerie. She wonders what happened to the guy that drowned. I wonder. I love Kelly. She's really funny, for just how unendingly dumb she is with everything that comes out of her mouth. She talks about how this cover is gonna look great in the St. Jude lobby, which, fun fact, is one of my favorite charities. She also talks about getting cosmetic surgery to shave down her liver, being in a music video, how good her poses are, and then finally finishes up. She says she's got a script for an audition which could lead her to becoming a star with political power, but she's worried she doesn't have any political opinions and would need to go somewhere to get some. We choose for her to go to Hollywood. We now see her in front of a green screen in a pretty strange looking outfit, or at least it looks strange to me. She basically says she lets directors sexually harass her so she can get better roles, which is just one of many randomly sad moments dropped in this mode. She talks about how she's making $400,000 off this movie, which in 2014, which we find out is the year and a bit, would be $566,239 a day. She asks if gas is $20 a gallon now, which thankfully it hasn't gotten that bad yet. And the director comes back for them to film more. She mentions while acting, Stake Back Outhouse, the fact that no one will prove the earth is round, falling for someone just to pay rent, and that they want to cheat on their partner before they die. She reveals it's a Hallmark movie and that it's going to win an Oscar, saying that 2014 is a good year and she's celebrating her 22nd birthday soon. She says she's going to do religious movies instead because of their audience being way more intense, which turns out to be true in a moment. She also brings up social media as a new thing, even though they had MySpace in the original series. We then cut to see that Kelly has been kidnapped by someone who reminds me a lot of Mr. White with the way he speaks and his sort of voice. He talks about how he's followed her since the beginning and how her perfect body and facial structure will make her a goddess to the colony, sounding very cultish, which is why I almost want to say it sounds like Mr. White.
The pure essence of your body and facial structure will serve as the perfect goddess to my colony!
He even says he'll deprogram her, and she begs us to get her out of this. We play more levels while she yells at us to put the game down and help untie her, or do something actually useful. In the end, the guy crashes the car and dies on his own accord, and Kelly wonders if anyone will come looking for her, hoping that she's popular enough for that to be the case. We cut to black after this, but given it's a literal car crash, I'm sure she got found eventually, so she's probably fine. And that's the first ending, what I'll call the kidnapped ending. There's not much here to deep dive into like the main game's endings, but they're definitely entertaining, you have to admit. This ending just shows an escalation of her exposing herself more and more to the world and becoming bigger and bigger until she's kidnapped, and only just barely gets out of it unscathed. Not much more to analyze, I believe, so let's move on. We go back to the choice after she becomes a model, and instead send Kelly to the club, where I guess that's where she thinks she'll get her political opinions. She talks about how much better the nightlife is to being an actor, and says these parties are so much cooler than the ones she had, and that if someone dies, it isn't her fault, before reiterating that the guy who drowned in the pool also wasn't her fault. From here, we see her take, well, basically everything. Straight vodka, cocaine, heroin, a little bit of everything until she's numb. She talks about how great drugs are as long as you have the outrageous money you need to afford them, which is foreshadowing for where this is going, and says she wants to come here every night. After this, we get a time skip and see Kelly dressed in, well, almost nothing. It turns out that she ended up in debt and went into porn to pay off her debts and afford more heroin. She talks about how it's empowering and everything and how this is the best course her life could have taken, but, I mean, look at her face. You can tell she's not happy, like at all. Between levels, she asks if she could still get a corporate job, says that as long as no one she knows finds out about this, then it's alright, that every girl goes through the experience of having an orgy, the only difference is that she's recording it, sounding more dejected than before, and talking about how she has really lame fans. It's all just really depressing. Once it's done, she talks about how she wants to kill herself every day and how she needs to use heroin and cosmetic surgery to make herself stop thinking about it. This is probably the most depressing ending, in my opinion, mostly for how you can tell how much she regrets her actions, yet is too far in to be able to take it back anymore. It's also not the only route where Kelly is suicidal, but this one feels more depressing than the one where she actually attempts to kill herself, which we'll get to. At least to me, it feels more depressing because of the way she talks and tries to justify it to herself, you know? I don't know, something about it speaks more to me than the other one. But regardless, we must continue. For this next one, we go back to the pool and choose to try and save the drowning kid, only for us to fail because neither us nor Kelly has CPR experience. And since now our DNA is on the man, it appears as though it was murder, so Kelly's being interrogated. I'm not exactly sure that's how it works, but whatever. It's class of 09 and the cops are not very good. What do you expect? We get the cop we know and maybe love, and denies Kelly her lawyer, which Kelly points out you can't just do that. But the police in this world, again, are incompetent, so... then says they'll stay here all day until she gets her story straight. The cops ask if Kelly molested him, which she denies because he's ugly, and reveals she doesn't know what perjury is. She also asks why they're not more concerned about a potential school shooting happening soon, which is just a joke mixed with a potentially easy callback. Once we're done, the cop starts saying a bunch of stuff to try to convict her, but she keeps misunderstanding what he's saying, so he asks her directly what happened, and we get the choice to be honest or try and fool him. For this route, we choose to be honest, which lands Kelly in jail, and I think she's wearing the same outfit Nicole did, which is a nice attention to detail. She talks about how she's going to be as tough as possible so that no one messes with her. Which is what happens. Our dialogue between levels is just shouting and threatening everybody around her for the bottom bunk, food, etc. At the end, she reveals she feels different, more violent, even though it hasn't even been that long yet, only a year. It reminds me of how Nicole felt changed by her experience in jail, even though it also wasn't that long, and both kind of wax philosophical a bit before we cut away. When we come back, we see Kelly finally out of jail after 20 years, meaning this ending takes place all the way in 2029, which is kind of insane to think about, isn't it? She's working as a waitress and is covered in tattoos. She talks about how the job isn't too bad and about the different kinds of people that come in, and how she has to fight the violent urges she picked up in jail, which, the way she phrases it, make me wonder if that's legitimate, or she's just being dramatic like Nicole was. She asks for our order, and we basically get an entire grocery list of stuff that we somehow managed to eat everything from. She talks about how life has been a huge waste of time since the two of us met. Both our life and hers, with her being in jail and us playing this stupid game, which feels like a reference towards the theme of the game being that it's just a distraction and a waste of time. She finishes off by saying she at least has stories to tell from jail, but asks what we have, and it ends. This one can come across as a bit depressing too. I mean, most of them can. But Kelly to me doesn't seem nearly as sad as the other two outright suicidal routes, so I feel like it doesn't quite compare, but that's my opinion. Anyway, we go back and lie to the cop instead, and we suddenly cut to Kelly 2 years later running a business meeting for Helping Hands, a non-profit company meant to distribute helpers, people certified in CPR, around the city to help those in need, and somehow hoping to outnumber the police force itself. She goes on to say they're going to get even more funding and that the vacation she takes with their money is for a good cause. Says that advertising is more important than the actual goal, that some of the budget for actually training people was cut, and that the good-looking people get first priority. So, yeah, feels just like a money laundering scheme to me, or just scummy business practice in general, if not that exactly. She ends by saying that what they're doing could eventually go national, which makes us then cut to around 10 years later with Kelly running for senator in 2022. She talks about wanting to put her little helpers all over the country and asks for questions from voters. However, these questions only sort of serve to screw her over. We get a question from Kyler, who I'm surprised is even still alive, the cop who asks if the Helping Hands will overtake the police, and Kelly says no, despite what she said during the meeting a decade prior. The next person I believe is actually Karen, who never gets an actual appearance in the game, leaving Megan as the only main female character left that never appears in the game. Other than Nicole's mom, but she's probably dead, so that doesn't count. And she accuses Kelly of using funds for her own interests. Kelly denies it before saying that she's going to Luxembourg next to help them with their homeless crisis. Next is Jeffrey talking about the kid who died in her pool, and she says Jeffrey wasn't invited, so how would he know? And finally, Karen asks another question, asking if the people are in her best interest. She says yes, and Jeffrey points out Hunter, who is actually alive, and reveals he was just in a coma for 10 years. Kelly accidentally says he almost died in her pool, and Kyler shouts that they should kill Kelly for lying. And although she tries to salvage the situation, it's clear she's not likely to win that election. This one is just a pretty fun one. I don't really have much to say that I haven't already said, but again, it's funny because I wouldn't have imagined Kyler living this long. Although, that also applies for another character in the final one. Halfway there, let's keep going. We go all the way back to the first choice and choose to go to Chick-fil-A, where she gushes about how good the food is and how everyone who works there is kind and religious, setting up one of the upcoming branches. Between levels, she talks about how only 3 people on Earth have peanut allergies, which As someone who only just developed a peanut allergy a few months ago, that one kind of stung a bit. How she sees all girl religious camps come here, again setting up the branch, revealing that the cashiers saying "my pleasure" turns her on a bit, which honestly I think that's just kind of adorable. And how the burger is likely only 300 calories, which probably also means to set up for the other branch. At the end, after Kelly asks if we want to have an eating competition, a priest comes up to her and offers an invitation to a Sunday Mass, but Kelly hesitates. We choose to eat more and cut to Kelly being completely overweight. She talks about how hideous she is and how guys never text her anymore, but I'm just wondering, what does she do for a job? Or I guess maybe she doesn't need one since her parents are rich, so she can just use their money or something? Though I also could see this as a world where her parents would just easily abandon her because of being fat and stuff, so who knows. She wants to fix herself, but at the same time she just wants to eat more to feel better, which is sadly a feeling I know well. I'm not exactly overweight. Okay, I'm not really overweight at all, really. But I've dealt with body image issues before due to having a slight gut and feeling that desire to lose weight while also being a victim of stress eating. It sucks. Her order arrives for 50 chicken kickers and a medium pizza, which just sounds awful, but she can't resist. She talks about how her doctor says she's killing herself slowly, but then says eating is the only way to keep herself from just outright ending her life faster. She also admits to being attracted to Colonel Sanders, which, I mean, given the way he's been shown in the past few years, I don't even blame her. Not my thing, though, personally. At the end, she thinks about how quickly her life went downhill and how it's easier to read nutrition facts than a self-help book, which is slight foreshadowing, and we get the choice for her to either exercise or just actually attempt to take her life. We choose the exercise for this route and cut to Kelly back to normal on an exercise bike, where she says it's been 2 years. She lost 98 pounds and reveals she published a self-help book called I Was Worthless Too, which is honestly a really good title. She says video games are making kids fatter, which again seems like subtle theming for the game's main story idea of put the game down and go outside. She even has started leading exercise classes, and has the perfect sort of instructor voice for it. She invites us to join her, and we get some more bits of Kelly directing her class in honestly demeaning ways, but hey, if it works, right? Although encouraging bullying isn't exactly great. She finishes off the session by congratulating us and talking about how she chases the next big thing, which for her is TV, and how she's in discussion with a producer about a talk show. We cut ahead to see that she did indeed get that talk show, named It's Kelly, and discusses the various guests she has. The first being a girl born with a swastika birthmark on her face, which I will admit made me actually laugh out loud, because yes, I am a terrible person with a morbid sense of humor. The second is a viral TV dinner producer, and the last guy is someone who masturbates 100 times a day, which you might already see the problem with that, and where that's probably going to go, but we'll get there. For the girl with the birthmark, she makes a joke about it being easy to date boys in Kentucky. The TV dinner guy left his wife for a Stouffer's thing, and the pervy guy reveals he masturbates 20 times to just Kelly before, as you might expect, he pulls his cock out, which makes her call security. At the end, she reveals he kidnapped the producers to get into the show and thanks everyone for showing up, and plugs her book series again. I'll be honest, if she hosted a talk show like this, I'd probably watch it. She has the perfect energy for it, that's for sure, and the crowd seems to love it, so why not? We head back to the choice where Kelly is fat and see her in the hospital, where she tried to overdose, but just became a quadriplegic instead, which only makes her even more depressed, and I genuinely just feel really bad for her here. The route ends somewhat positively, so I still feel like the porn ending is worse, but this definitely comes close. She's happy that we at least came to visit, and for some reason asks us to play the game more, which, considering that we seem to be playing the game every single time, it's funny to imagine in context. Like, seeing Kelly on a porn set, yeah, gotta play the game. Get invited to Kelly at the talk show? Well, damn, this game is more interesting than that, right? It's just kind of funny to imagine. She spends the dialogue between levels continuing to be depressed, but slightly less so about us playing the game. She says we have inspired her to use whatever feeling she has left to do something, and we cut to see her competing in the Paralympic Games. She gives herself encouragement between levels until she manages to get the gold in the 8-meter relay, which is a funny, if not darkly comedic joke, and says she wants to throw another house party. Oh well, at least she seems happy, more than I can say for the porn ending. Anyway, We now go back to the fast food place, and she instead decides to check out church. She calls Christianity unsexy, and then imagining Jesus being there watching her while she has sex makes him feel creepy. And I just find all this funny given how she tried to turn to Jesus in the sex rehab part, or got a purity ring in the main story. The man asks for her to review some verses. She has some funny dialogue about religion between the levels, but it's kind of all disconnected from each other and not too much to note. At the end, she says she's got the gist, and the priest asks if she accepts Christ unconditionally, and she says that it sounds like an abusive relationship, before it gives her an idea, and we get the final choice of flirting with the guy or going all in on religion. For this one, we choose to flirt and get a CG of Kelly in a nun's outfit that is very fetishy, especially with this angle, but I mean, honestly, I don't really care. Feels less intrusive than the Flipside stuff did, that's for sure. There's also the sound of a chain, which makes it sound like she literally has the priest on a leash, which I wouldn't be surprised about either. It would definitely add to the whole fetish thing, too. The priest calls her mistress, and Kelly talks about rather mundane things like ripping mattress tags and calls it Satanism, also revealing she flirted with the priest for only a few minutes before he completely folded to her. She asks why God would put so many fun things in the world if we're expected not to capitalize on it, and that sin is upon us. She says stuff like meth was made by God, to use the internet here for porn, make the place a casino, etc. She even goes so far as to say that with their power they can create a new world order, that they should start spreading the message. And then we see her behind a wall as we hear the sound of battle around her, having apparently started a war with her cult, because I'm almost positive that's what it is. We hear her loading a gun as she asks us to help fight them off. Between fights we hear more combat, like gunfire and bombs, and she generally doesn't treat the situation with enough seriousness. At the end, she gets overwhelmed as people get in, she begs for her life, and we literally hear her get shot to death. And the squishiness of the shot makes me think she was shot in the head. I really like this route because it's just outright the most insane one, and the only one that ends with Kelly dead. Plus, this outfit in particular looks really good on her, even if it is fetish bait. And again, playing our game while this war is going on is really funny to picture. Only one ending left, which is actually my favorite, for a reason we'll get to when we finish it. We go back to the final choice and choose to embrace Christianity, where we cut to see Kelly has become a counselor after a few years, and she's become homophobic. This outfit is really pretty, but she starts spouting off some dumb excuses like the person being too shy to talk to the opposite sex, asking about the gay porn they've been using, for purely good reasons, she assures them, and not to look it up herself, obviously. That she'd cry of joy if they were struck down for their sins, and to imagine Jesus standing next to them like an hallucination, that hate crime is okay, you know, a lot of really shitty stuff. She has a really pleasant and soft voice in this section, which contrasts well with the next one, which we cut to see that she's become a conservative podcaster, and has been for 8 years, putting us likely in 2019, 2020, 10 years after the game at the very least. Now she's even worse, taking calls and talking about how evolution is fake, being gay is insane, that a caller should shoot his wife for saying he can't buy a gun, that abortion is bad, the green M&M isn't sexy anymore, which almost sounds like Jeffrey calling, all the really fun stuff. But then the final caller is Nicole. I find it shocking she's still alive given how she's in her late 20s by this point at the very least, potentially 30. And Nicole does her usual thing and immediately starts calling out Kelly, talking about how she had sex with a lot of people in high school, both men and women, how she did cam work in college, had an abortion despite how she's talking against it now, and again, how she was super gay. Kelly does a poor job defending herself, and after failing to argue against Nicole, she ends the call and the show, and this mode finally ends. I love this ending because not only is it fun to discover that Nicole is somehow, despite everything, still alive, but that the final ending, since this is listed as number 8, is our girl herself coming to tell Kelly how much of a hypocrite she's being, almost feeling like she's bringing everything back around in a circle. Plus, tackling the religious angle that's sort of been a part of Kelly since Re-Up is interesting, showing her diving fully into it and being led astray. But anyway, that's it. That's all of the endings of Weekend at Kelly's. I think it's the best mode in the game for its insanity and the way it feels more in line with the previous 3 games, basically making Kelly a protagonist in the same vein as Nicole and Jekka. Because, yeah, this mode is really fucking long. Even if you play it perfectly, it can potentially be double the length of the main story, meaning Kelly is more of a protagonist of this game than any of the others. The insanity of things goes beyond anything the other 3 games got to, or even this one, really. And that escalation, as well as getting to see what some of the potential futures of the series and these characters are, is just really interesting to me. The fact that one of these endings is in literally 2029 in the future is just wild. But maybe I'm the only one who cares. I know some people would have preferred Ari or Emily to have gotten the entire route instead, because Kelly isn't fleshed out as them. But honestly, I think that's why Kelly is actually the perfect choice for something like this. Because she's so malleable, it's easy to slot her into these various wild situations and not have it feel like it's out of character for her. Every route feels possible with someone like her, despite how ridiculous some of them get, and while before she was kind of a neutral, normal character to me, unlike some of the other more prominent girls, after Weekend at Kelly's, my opinion of her character is just so much higher now because of this mode giving her so much attention. She was really the perfect person to center this mode around. Plus, and I'll get more to this later, but the puzzle gameplay of Weekend at Kelly's feels way more fair than the main story. Overall, it's the most fun I ended up having with the game, and while others may find it a bit dumb, and I can understand why, I really enjoyed it, and I want more stuff like it in the future. Like, more stuff for the lesser shown girls, like Karen and Megan and whatever. I think it could be fun. The gameplay is Pokemon Puzzle League, but Class of 09. Literally, look up the gameplay of Puzzle League, and this game is directly copying it. Not just with the gameplay itself, but the conversations and the UI too. I mean, which is fine. I've never played Puzzle League before, but I enjoyed the gameplay of this game for the first 3 campaigns. Okay, so for a basic rundown, it's a match 3 game where tiles slowly rise to the top of the screen, and if it hits the top of the screen, you lose. It gets faster with each campaign, and when one of the 2 players makes a match of 4 or more tiles, or makes a combo, it'll drop trash tiles onto their opponent. If a match is made next to these trash tiles, they can be converted into normal tiles to use. The Weekend at Kelly's mode, being single player, doesn't have the trash tiles, and instead just gets faster and faster with each new stage. You can only match horizontally, but you can easily chain combos when it's going fast enough, and drop tiles out to the side of a column if you have empty space underneath to make matches. The gameplay seems simple on the surface, but it has a bit of nuance to it that you can learn and get good at very quickly, at least in my experience. But I also have some experience with puzzle games in general, even if not this specific kind. It's genuinely pretty engaging and fun at first, and doesn't feel as tedious as it could be, since most matches are at most a few minutes, and sometimes even as low as 30 seconds. Unless you're going against Emily. Emily is an absolute monster in the first few campaigns. She's one of few characters that has a gimmick, with hers being that she's high on Adderall, so her cursor moves really fast and frantically, which you'd think would make her mess up since she also seems to flip tiles randomly, but in reality it causes her to make matches so much faster than everyone else, and easily get rid of the trash tiles you drop on her. For context, in my own playthrough, most matches in the first campaign were at most 3 minutes. Emily was 11, and I've heard some people say that they've seen her first one take an hour. She feels like a final boss when in reality she can sometimes appear just halfway through the campaign. She actually gets easier as time goes by because of the screen moving faster, but that first fight against her on easy difficulty is brutal. It sucks because you don't get any sort of boost or anything when you get to actually play as her, and not that I even know what you do to mimic that sort of gimmick, but even so, it feels a bit cheap that she has it against you, but then you've got nothing when it's your turn to play as her. The only other characters to have gimmicks is the Chustler, who makes insane chain combos that can get really annoying, and the cop in Jekka's route might have a limit on chains, but I beat him so fast that I never found out, so I can't speak for him. Though even if that was the case, it doesn't really matter much. Like I said, I think the gameplay is good, until you get to Emily's campaign. Hell, maybe even Ari's. I genuinely don't think I could have beaten this game if I didn't have ADHD, because you need insane hand-eye coordination and the ability to think very quickly in order to beat these last 2 campaigns. And for Emily's campaign, I think I lost like 30 times. Thankfully, I believe there's infinite continues, or at least up to 99, which should be more than enough, but it actually becomes atrocious how annoying it gets, because while you could shout skill issue for it, it doesn't feel like that's what it is. It gets to a point where it feels like luck. You have to get lucky and hope that the opponent doesn't get a ton of combos, suddenly filling up half your screen with trash tiles that you simply can't do anything with. Especially since even if you match next to them, sometimes, even at the most pivotal moments, one row in the middle will stay as trash blocks. And so instead of a bunch of new blocks falling down to create combos from, they're still stuck up near the top, meaning you are still likely completely fucked. And by the time you potentially start to recover, they're already launching another combo at you that fucks you over anyway. Meanwhile, you can drop so many rows of trash blocks on them and you think you're about to win, and then they just literally have them at the top when suddenly they make a match and all of your progress is just gone. It becomes so frustrating that you'll just lose your patience more and more with each failed attempt. And it's not even all that fast sometimes. Don't even get me started on Weekend at Kelly's. The final stages of those routes can be insanely fast to the point of feeling like you can barely even play them. It feels like you have to be competitively skilled to even have the potential to pass these final stages of both modes. Which sucks because, again, I think it's fun. Admittedly, despite my grievances, I think the Weekend at Kelly's puzzles are better because it's more of a gentle difficulty curve and doesn't feel unfair the way the main story does. It's just that the gameplay is hindered by the difficulty and, to a lesser degree, the repetition if you play it all at once. You just grow so tired of it. Maybe I'm making too big of a deal of it. Even if that is the main gameplay of the game and everything, who knows. But in my experience, it just made it feel like a slog to get through by the end of the main story especially. Weekend at Kelly's is the best part of the game. Before playing the game, Kelly was like a mid, maybe low, high tier character for me. She had no bad qualities, but nothing super spectacular that made her stand out to me. But this mode, and getting to see her do so many insane things, easily took her to near the top of my character rankings, as I mentioned. And although it's more linear with its branches than the first or second games, the fact that even with the puzzle game aspect, we still get another mode that's reminiscent of the original visual novel series is really good, especially making Kelly the protagonist, setting her next to Nicole and Jekka, something very few characters in the series get the prestige of accomplishing. The mode, besides the difficulty of later stage puzzles, is fun, and the art and different outfits we get to see are really pretty and keep me engaged the entire time. Funny that the side mode might be the best part of the game, huh? The main story, though, is interesting, and allows us to see the world through fresh new eyes, Ari and Emily, two fan favorites of the series, which was a really good call. The characters and their interactions feel on point, and basically every major character is here with the exclusion of Megan, and if you wanted to argue her as being one, Karen. Although she does get a little bit in the Weekend at Kelly's mode, but eh. The only one of the teachers missing that I would say would count as major is the counselor, but at the same time, he'd likely just have his Flipside voice actor, so I probably wouldn't enjoy him anyway. It does a lot of fascinating things with all the callbacks to previous routes, but both major events and small ones, and it's really fun, even seemingly confirming a route or two here and there. On top of that, having it continue to be post-high school and even post-Flipside on top of that was not what I was expecting at all, with the final message of the game being something the series has been building on since the first game, which is really cool. However, the execution is somewhat bad, in my opinion. The conversations being flat images without expression changes can make it harder to engage for some people. The cutscenes at the end of each campaign, except the last one, feel far too short and don't leave you with much to think on until the very end. There absolutely should have also been conversations that happened after you won the fights as well, since I would have loved to see how our opponents reacted to losing, especially when they were cocky and all, and the fact it just cuts straight to the next character feels a bit shallow, like we're missing out on some fun extra content. Not only that, but holy shit does the gameplay cripple the story in the harder difficulties. Because picture this. You play one level for ages, you lose 10 times in a row, spend half an hour just desperately hoping to get lucky, and finally pass the damn level, and by a stroke of luck, you do. And what are you greeted with? Not a small victory conversation where your character gets to lord their victory over their opponent. No, it immediately cuts to the next character, where you get a 2-minute conversation with them and then immediately have to do another puzzle that you'll likely struggle on again. You see what I mean? It gets so tedious and hard that you might be so drained after one single fight that you're still reeling from it while the game is continuing on with its story. A story you likely have far less interest in now because you were so focused on just beating the damn level. And then this repeats 12 times for the last 2 campaigns. It's just that the gameplay takes you out of the story simply because there's potentially so much time between conversations, or the fight was so grueling that it's harder to give a shit at all. The thing is, for all its faults and missteps, Flipside was at least accessible. It had no skill barrier, only choices, which you could then save and come back to when you wanted to do other choices. It was all easily accessible. This game, for the final Kelly parts and the final parts of the main story, requires you to be good at the game to even see those final parts of the story, and that to me makes that aspect so much worse than even the worst the series has offered up to this point. I don't think it's bad on its own, it's just taken way too far to be enjoyable. It also should not have been $20, man, $15 at most. Plus, there's an online mode, but it barely feels worth mentioning because there's like 300 concurrent players right now, as of writing the script actually, and that's going to drop eventually. And you need to have a code to connect with somebody, you can't just like play online anyway. And then the marathon mode is just an endless mode, so it's more of the same. The voice acting in this game is still top-notch, and everybody does a fantastic job in their roles, as always. So many talented VAs that I love listening to, and I hope if this series continues, they're able to keep bringing them back. Because everybody always does such a good job in this series. The only time I've ever had a problem was the counselor in Flipside, but I mentioned that before. I don't think the voice actor was bad, the voice just didn't fit the character, but everybody else just... their voice acting is so good in this series. I love it. And I always love hearing more. So, what's my opinion overall of the game? Like a 5 out of 10, maybe a 6. This was not at all what I expected for the newest game of this series. I feel mixed on so many aspects of this game that I'm genuinely not sure how to feel about it. I know I jokingly just gave it a score, but in reality, I'm not actually sure how accurate that is. I love some parts of this game, and despise others, but overall, it's just such a drastic tonal shift for what's usually such a somewhat grounded series. I would be lying if I said I wasn't at least somewhat interested to see where we go from here, and I will play and cover anything that comes out in the future, but after this game, my hopes will be even more hesitant than they already were when this game was announced. This series has a lot of potential, and despite how this game turned out, I am still kind of excited, because I really do enjoy these characters and the humor, and even a game like this, stuff like Weekend at Kelly's can surprise me with an absolute gem even amidst some dirt and grime. I just want more of these characters and their world, and I hope that we do get more, whatever form it takes. I'm just worried where SBN 3 will go from here, and how good it's actually going to be. Regardless, I'll play it for y'all and keep making videos as long as you want me to. I do genuinely love Class of 09, and even if the last 2 games have been somewhat mixed, I still adore this series and its characters, and I want to see all the insane things they'll be experiencing in future installments. So regardless of what happens, I'll keep playing as much as I possibly can. As for my other videos, I'm still working on gathering notes for all the character analysis videos, and this game will be giving me even more to chew on for those videos, so expect to hear more of this game in the future. For now, though, I'd like to thank my members for supporting me that little extra bit. Members get to not only see videos early, but also get exclusive videos such as me and usually a guest taking notes over games and other media I wish to cover in the future. Currently, we're taking notes on the first Danganronpa game, where we just finished Chapter 3, and the first Ace Attorney game, where we're on Case 4. If you're a Class of 09 fan, which assumedly you are if you're here, I also have videos showing some of the mistakes I had reading lines from my previous retrospectives on the series and all the notes I took for said retrospectives. And as for those members, I'd like to thank them. We have NR960W52, it's not really much for me to read. Soccer Mommy 71, Frenzy Productions, Helgums 648, Tarlian Atkins I90, Hanamaki 4391, Heel Everhart, and of course my lovely, wonderful, darling boyfriend Ark, who without him I wouldn't have done all this amazing stuff. Thank you all for your support. I really, really do appreciate it. And that's all for now, and thank you for watching. Leave a like if you enjoyed, subscribe for more content like this in the future, leave a comment if you can, and I'll see you next time. Love, love.